Welcome back to Fresh Outlook, everybody. I'm your host, Logan Crawford. The facts of the Syrian refugee crisis are startling. 12 million Syrians have fled their homes because of the conflict. Half of them are children. 4 million Syrians are refugees. Most of them are in Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan. Children affected by the Syrian conflict are at risk of becoming ill, malnourished, abused, or exploited. Millions have been forced to quit school. More than 700,000 Syrian refugees and other migrants have risked their lives so far this year to travel to Europe. Let's say hello to our expert panel here on Fresh Outlook. I am joined by Gary Shaye from Save the Children, Yohuru Williams, and John Davenport as well. Gary, I'm going to start with you. What's the headline for the innocent victims of this horrible civil war that's been raging now for more than 2 years?
The headlines are much more still needs to be done. And before I came here today, I looked at the population of New Jersey, which is roughly 10 million. We have more than that number of people affected with the Syrian conflict. We have 4 million who fled the country and 6 million who are displaced. So if we could all imagine the state of New Jersey with 4 million having fled, 6 million not living in their homes, it gives us a context for what's happening on the ground. What needs to be done? Save the Children is on the ground throughout the whole region, in the Middle East and in Europe, and it really falls into 2 or 3 major categories. For the people inside Syria, we have to get access to food, health care, and winterization. And winterization is going to be an issue throughout the conflict. We do this through partners who are on the ground. In the region, we're in Jordan, we're in Lebanon, we've been in these countries for 30 or 40 years, Iraq. Imagine you're in Syria and you flee to Iraq for safety. Programs, again, are education, health, in the case of Jordan, food. We've provided over 500 tons of food to the people in the Zatari camp. For people on the move, people are traveling lightly, they don't have a lot. We want to provide safe spaces in the cases of people arriving in Greece. And the number is now up to 800,000 people who have crossed. 3,000 have died that we know of. Many of them are children and many are unaccompanied. We want to protect the children who are unaccompanied, provide food, shelter, information, and a safe space so they can continue their onward journey.
We're going to learn more about what's happening with your organization in just a moment. But first, I'm going to talk to Yohuru about this safe space. A lot of people have been talking about creating a safe zone within Syria. Basically, house the Syrians in Syria, protect them, create a no-fly zone so the war damage is negligible. What are your thoughts?
It would be very difficult to implement, and then what are the long-term prospects of maintaining that safe zone within Syria? You're now talking about a commitment of troops, a commitment of resources that already are going to tax the capacity of us to deal with those issues elsewhere. So it's not a bad idea if you were in a position to ensure that you could do that long-term. But refugees are refugees. That situation exists because people don't feel safe because the political system of that country is broken down to a degree, and the civil war exists to an extent that it's overwhelmed the ability of people to respond to it in a way that protects their lives. So they run. I mean, we see that. They flee. Part of the problem, and I love the way you express this, is we talk about this in terms of a disaster. The ability of a government to respond to a disaster is conditioned by its ability to look at certain factors and to say, let's privilege those people who are the weakest, children, right? When you can't do that, and we're looking at this in terms of Syria, when you can have the governor of New York, or excuse me, Mayor de Blasio holding up an image of a dead boy and saying to the world, you know, we have a moral responsibility to do this, we can't run from that moral responsibility. And I think what you're seeing when you say, well, let's just simply establish a safe space, is in some sense a dereliction of duty that says, well, let's keep their problems over there and assume that we can contain it, rather than recognizing that they run much deeper.
John, your thoughts?
I agree. That's exactly the line that Prime Minister Cameron took as well in Britain, that, well, let's try to help these Syrians in Turkey or Jordan, or safe spaces within Syria. And I think a no-fly zone it would still be a good first step. It would have been much more effective 2 or 3 years ago than now. Because the situation is so much more complicated. The different Sunni rebel groups are so much more fragmented. At one time we had mostly moderate rebels, the Free Syrian Army, but now we've got many, different groups of different levels of radicalization. If we were to try to create, what would we do to create a safe zone? We would almost have to draw a line north-south through Aleppo and through Homs and Hama and some of these big cities, because different parts of these cities are controlled by different groups, and you've got while I think most of the atrocities have been on the Shia side with the Assad government attacking Sunni, and this is why ISIS has arisen, is in response to his atrocities. We also have ISIS and other radical Sunni groups attacking Shia and other minorities like various Christian groups, various Orthodox and Catholic Christians or Druze. I mean, a city like Aleppo, there's 10 or 12 different zones. I mean, different groups. It's incredibly difficult for doctors and aid workers to work in this situation. I don't know exactly where you would position this no-fly zone in Syria is really the point. And could you effectively defend it just from the air? I don't think so. You would just have guerrilla fighters coming in on the ground at night and so on, attacking bases or camps that you set up there.
Gary, how do we, or what is your organization doing to prevent the loss of life? Concretely, what are some of the things that Save the Children has implemented?
Obviously, we want to improve conditions for the refugees wherever they are and the displaced within Syria. Access to Syria is very challenging. There are certain moments when we can get supply chains in.
Is that done by airdrops? How's that done?
No, it's usually done by trucks and convoys. We hear from our partners on the ground. We mobilize resources. We work with lots of different vendors. Right now, we're very concerned about the winter. The winters are cold.
I'm going to get back to the winter in just a second.
Okay.
These people who are doing God's work by going in and helping the refugees in Syria on the ground and in trucks, have you lost anyone? Has there been
We
any?
have not to date.
Okay.
We're extremely careful about the safety of our staff, but obviously we're working in a very risky environments, and that's always a risk. And we do everything possible to minimize those risks. We also realize the risks the populations are facing and the short windows of opportunity that are available to get supplies in.
Are you given military protection when you go in?
We're not. The best protection we have is always the knowledge of the local population, what Save the Children and other NGOs are doing. So you create your own safety net to the degree possible. Obviously, you have people who don't care what the safety net is, but we're extremely careful to get the supplies in. Some of the other concerns we have, about a quarter of the people who have fled outside Syria are headed by female households. A lot of those women can't work, so what happens? They send children to work. So children start to work in exploitative areas. Girls are getting married at a younger age. So we're doing everything possible to create some opportunities for children to continue school. The challenge is this crisis has expanded to Europe with more people on the move. The governments of Europe don't have the same amount of resources to put back into the region to manage the people who aren't on the move. And as services are being cut, and I have spoken with people, I was in Zaatari in Jordan in early August, the camp has a smaller population. And it's because some of the services have had to be reduced, and some people have chosen to go back to Syria and have said through a translator, I would rather die in my home than have services cut here. And it's through no lack of effort of the UN and the international community. But we've heard from our European colleagues that our ongoing programs in the region are going to be reduced because they have to provide for services for the refugees who are arriving there.
We're going to get back to the challenges of the winter in just a second. Yohuru, I'm going to ask you first, is the welcome wearing out in Europe for the Syrian refugees? It seemed like they were embraced at first by Germany. Now it seems more and more countries are saying, nope, can't come here.
Particularly in the aftermath of the Paris attack, yes. And you understand that because people are concerned. There are real fears about the possibility that you're bringing people into your borders who potentially may pose a risk to the native populations. The problem with that is that there is no concrete evidence that that in fact is the case, that these people are coming from or in large number or contain concentrations of people who would engage in that type of behavior. When nations reach out and take on that responsibility, there are screening processes and other protocol you can put into place to ensure that you've done your due diligence and ensuring that you're not bringing in people who may practice radical politics or in some way pose a threat to the native state. Having said that, these people are incapacitated, and your first impulse, I think, is, and we argue this in the United States, it's certainly the mantra of Save the Children and other NGOs, the idea that the first directive, the prime directive, is to preserve lives. You know, you deal with the other things later on, but preserve life first.
Running out of time, how do people help your organization, and quickly, what are the challenges of the winter?
Okay, how to help Save the Children? Go to our website, savethechildren.org/Syria. Donations are for our total response for people in the region and people on the move. Winterization, the challenge is getting materials purchased now, distributed now. People think of Jordan and Lebanon, they often think of it as being warm Middle East. In the winter, it's snow. And we had snow last year in both locations, same thing in parts of Iraq. So what can we do now to improve the conditions of the housing and line up stocks, get hygiene kits? We want to be able to distribute as much warm clothing and shoes as possible and make sure that all our inventories are fully in stock.
SaveTheChildren.org if you want to help
Syria.
Yohuru. And Gary, John, thank you for your time. We'll have more. When we come back, we're going to take a look at the world's economic health 7 years after those too big to fail.